As many fans in Broncos country know, quarterback is the top priority in their mind. But guess whose top priority it is as well? General Manager George Paton. He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's the Broncos' need for a quarterback? You get that and much more on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, plus a player prospect profile series on Malik Willis, Liberty quarterback. You get that on today's episode of the show.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Rourke, joined alongside by my co-host, Sarah Bettinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for making this your first listen of the day. Locked On Broncos, even in the offseason, we are here 5 days a week. So Broncos country, stay with us. We have a lot of great content. NFL free agency coming up. Make sure you stay locked in, whether you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform or here on YouTube in 4K high definition. If you want daily access, all you got to do, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news content coverage. Sarah did a really good job yesterday setting up an interview with former Broncos Pro Bowl safety, Super Bowl 50 champion, member of the No-Fly Zone, TJ Ward. If you did not catch that episode, we encourage you, go back after this episode and watch, listen, and tune in. Obviously, a lot of great insight from Boss Ward here. But Sarah, look, hey, a lot to talk about on today's episode of the show. We're going to talk about Malik Willis and his prospect profile series preview that we're going to do here. But quarterback, top priority here for the Denver Broncos. And that was the key message when George Paton and Nathaniel Hackett met with the media at the NFL Scouting Combine.
It really was. You know, George Paton got asked. I watched almost all the interviews, Cody. I was scouring YouTube looking for all the different interviews, whether it was with NFL or Pro Football Talk or DenverBroncos.com. I watched all the interviews, and every single one of them asked George Paton the same exact questions. You know, what are you looking for in a quarterback? How high is quarterback on your priority list? And I love that George Paton is just honest about it, right? I mean, he does say the right things, you know, when he's talking about like, well, you know, we want to upgrade every area of the team. We want to do this, that, and the other. We like these positions in the draft. But yeah, he did acknowledge in an interview with Pro Football Talk that, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, he said he qualified it first, of course, by saying, you know, I feel like every team should have quarterback as a 10. Yeah, it's the most important position in sports, but he put it in the Broncos context as well and said, for us, it is a 10. I mean, it's the most important thing, and it is. And that's why we talk about it every single day. That's why we're not leaving any stone unturned here, even on the podcast, because we want to look at this from their perspective as well.
I think it's important that you mention that because that's exactly what George Paton said when asked about it. The Broncos are going to be very aggressive when it comes to getting the quarterback that they believe will be their guy, which is the most important thing. You have to have belief as an organization that whoever you're going to try to pursue, whoever you may look to draft, if that's the route that the Broncos do in fact take, he is going to be the guy for that organization. And I think that you can't draft a guy and say, okay, hey, he might be the guy, because then you're just wasting capital. The Broncos are looking for out who their guy is. And the NFL Scouting Combine has allowed them to interview these prospects. They've met with almost every quarterback, every top quarterback in this year's draft class in their informal meetings that they only get 15 minutes with. They said it's really important for us to get to know who this person is as a person. I mean, this player is as a person. They know who he is as a player, but they want to know who these players are as people. So that's one big part of the process. But as you mentioned, George Paton said no stone unturned to find that guy, which, look, is top priority here for the Denver Broncos this offseason. But even like Nathaniel Hackett met with the media too, and he was asked some interesting questions about quarterback. People tried to get in some Aaron Rodgers things for him, and he just like, who? Who's that? You know, I love that his ploy on things. Obviously, you can't comment on a lot of these things going on here. But for the Broncos, he was asked a specific question, Sarah. What are the traits that you look for, Nathaniel Hackett, in a quarterback? What do they need in order, in your opinion, to be successful? And he mentioned they have to be intelligent. They have to be tough. They have to be accurate. And he said even the added bonus on top, like the physical side of it, you want to have them have a physical element to it because you're going to take some shots in the NFL. And if you can't be durable, you're not going to have a very long career. So with all that said in mind, I mean, what were your takeaways on what Nathaniel Hackett had said during the NFL Scouting Combine?
I think he continues to confirm first and foremost that he's just awesome to listen to. I mean,
He is.
I know that when the games start happening and people have even asked him about this, like, what are you like during a 3-game losing streak. And I love his response. He was like, I think he was talking to Nine
Mike
News
Bliss.
insider Mike Kliss, and he's like, that hasn't really happened for me very much. And I just thought that was great. It's like, I love it. And that's the kind of confidence in a competitor that you want, coming to the table as your head coach. I love the different details he's been giving about like teachers for the coaches that he's been bringing in. He called one of them his neurobiology buddy or whatever, that neuroscience. I don't even know what the heck he majored in college, but it was something way above what I can understand or fathom, neuro something. So, I mean, it's so cool to hear him talk about those kind of things. And of course, you get the scripted answers anytime they talk about any sort of specifics, right? With Aaron Rodgers, at least he's cracking jokes, but obviously, talking about just what it's like to coach a guy. And I thought it was interesting too. One thing that he did say about Aaron Rodgers, that I think people would be surprised to know. Chris Sims said, Aaron Rodgers, I would call him the greatest quarterback of all time. And Hackett was like, I would call him an even better person than that. And so I think that's really important for people to know, as people seem to take issue with it, Rodgers' personality. But those are some of the main takeaways that I took from Hackett. Obviously, he continues to confirm he's a fun guy to listen to, but at the same time, you just get the vibe as a fellow human being that you would want to work for that guy. You would want to play for that guy. So if you're a quarterback coming in, whether it's the draft, free agency, trade, I just think you can come in knowing and feel really comforted knowing that you have a coach that's going to have your back. He's mentioned that about even a guy like Drew Lock. Like, he was talking to Chris Sims about Drew Lock, and they were like, it's really tough for quarterbacks to adjust to all these changing schemes early in their NFL career. And Hackett even went on, he said it could be detrimental. And so I think as many people as want to say like, oh, we make excuses for this guy or we make excuses for that guy, I think it's so critical that you have a relationship with your head coach, that you can trust the guy, your offensive coordinator, you can trust the guy. And for a quarterback, I think they should be really, really excited knowing that they get to work with Hackett and his staff.
It's going to be all about teaching and growing, and that's a big philosophy that this coaching staff under Nathaniel Hackett is really putting forth, is teaching. We got to be really great teachers. There's a lot of energy and excitement, and also even mentioned something about we throw them iPads now, and we want them to draw stuff up on their iPads while we're in the meeting rooms, and we want to see what they're seeing. I like that because it goes back to the element of seeing what they know, and then you can have those conferences with these guys. Okay, hey, here's why we look at this rather than this. I think that's super important. But, now we have a little bit of a blueprint. When we look at all these quarterback prospects in this year's drafts there, now we know what the Broncos are looking for. Someone who is tough, intelligent, accurate, and physical. So is the next guy that we're going to talk about coming up here in just a moment, does he fit any of those characteristics when we talk about Liberty quarterback Malik Willis? We're going to get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, Broncos country, let me tell you about betonline.net, the sponsor of today's episode of the show here. And football might be over for the season, but basketball, it is in full steam with both pro and college hoops ongoing. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, and even the odds where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. And BetOnline, they remain the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and information all year long. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. So head to the website today, use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. Jumping into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, a mile high salute to you, both Sarah Bettinger and myself. We appreciate all of you who take time to comment on YouTube, to listen to the podcast, to leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and interact with us on Twitter, on social media, at Cody Rourke NFL, at Sarah Bettinger, at Lockdown Broncos. It means the world to both of us. And I know we don't always get to respond to every single one, but we see it. We love you. We appreciate you. And thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the show, making it your first listen of the day. Sarah, going on with our prospect profile series now as we continue to dive a little bit deeper into the NFL draft. Obviously, we're going to be talking about quarterback until we get through all the QBs. Then we'll look at other positions of need for Denver and look at prospects that could fit the bill for what the Broncos maybe need going into 2022. Let's talk about Liberty quarterback here, Malik Willis. Now, we know the blueprint, I got tongue twisted there, and the foundation that Nathaniel Hackett is looking for with quarterbacks here. And now I think anytime we evaluate these QBs and we ask the question, do these guys possess these traits here that Nathaniel Hackett had outlined? So let's talk about Malik Willis here. Now, I think it's evident here. You can make the argument here and that he's probably got the strongest arm in this year's NFL draft. We saw all the advanced metrics coming out of the Senior Bowl with what they were tracking in practice, his arm metrics, the velocity, the distance it travels through the air and how far it travels. I mean, it even surpassed Josh Allen's when Josh Allen was at the Senior Bowl as well. So he does have a big arm and he's got some zip to it. I mean, that's something that's certainly appealing about him coming out of Liberty.
It really is. I think that's one of the things that definitely stands out when you watch him play. Just the zip that's behind his throws, and that's fun to watch from the quarterback position. Like Malik Willis transferring to Liberty, he brought them into the top 25 of college football, and I point to that always when I think about his entire evaluation. Like it can't be overstated that Liberty got into the top 25. I don't know that that's happened in my lifetime. Maybe it has. Maybe they've slipped in another year, but I think that's a huge notch on his belt. And the fact that he did it without, I mean, I don't know if any other Liberty guys are getting drafted this year, Cody. So, I mean, he did it without a lot of talent around him. He was able to put up almost video game like numbers, but there are some concerns I think that need to get brought up with Malik Willis. Obviously, being that guy on the team that may be the most talented guy on the team, you might try to do a little too much at times. He obviously threw more interceptions this past season than anyone would have really liked to have seen, given some of the hype on him coming into the year, NFL draft-wise. So you throw a few more interceptions and people would like to see you take a lot of sacks. That's kind of the result of him, I think, just trying to make plays a lot of the time. So the questions that you then ask, like how well can you work within structure? Or maybe the better question, maybe the more optimistic version of that question is, as we've been talking about Nathaniel Hackett and his scheme and how friendly it might be for a quarterback, if you're working within structure, can you be even better? And I think Malik Willis, he shows the toughness and physicality as a player. I mean, he never wants a play to be dead. He's always running around making, doing everything that he possibly can, whether it's backyard style football or not, to make a play. So those are the standout things to me for him on both the good and the negative side.
Tough, physical, athletic. We do have that. And obviously, he's an intelligent guy to be able to get to where he's at. He does contain all the traits that the Broncos are looking for. However, I do think it's worth noting here, Sarah, and we'll talk about maybe his developmental traits coming up here in a little bit later on the show here. For him, he's a dual threat option. You did mention the fact, like, taking more sacks. Like, for a guy like him, there was times I watched him on film, and obviously a major shout out to our good friend Tim Jenkins for the film breakdowns that he does on these quarterbacks as well, because you also get a lot more insight, especially if you can't find any of the all-22 film on some of these prospects. Tim, for some reason, has the magic connection. But there's times where instead of throwing the ball, letting it go out of his hands to find the open guy, sometimes he would hold on to it a little bit longer. I mean, I believe that there was like a 3rd and 18 play here. He had a guy on the left sideline on a fade route. Cornerback was underneath. He could have fit it into the window. Instead, he rolled out to his right, and he created a little bit of a chaotic situation for himself because the offensive line, he said, was giving him great protection. However, holding on to the ball too long, wide receivers at that point, it's easier for DBs to cover, especially if you're in a jam, you're running all around. They can get on the hip real easily. It's not just the initial, like the first 3.5 seconds of a play. That's where you really find that separation by wide receivers against defensive backs. That's where you really try to get guys open. But for him, holding onto the ball a little too long is a little bit of a telling concern there. And as you mentioned, is that part of something? Can he get better at that at the NFL level? Because you're going to play against defenses here at this next level. You can't hold on to the ball like that. And obviously, we've seen, I think, in the gauntlet for Broncos quarterbacks since Peyton Manning, we've seen what it's been like for quarterbacks to hold on to the ball too long in the NFL. They end up not lasting long, or their production for the team stinks. And Denver can't simply afford that. So I do think that's one thing to look at here. But he is a dual threat guy. He had 29 rushing touchdowns in 4 seasons in his overall collegiate career, a 48-18 touchdown interception ratio. However, the last couple of years, a little bit more interceptions than the first 3 seasons combined there. So you want to kind of dial that back down a little bit, especially at the NFL level. You cannot get away with certain things at this next level, especially with the speed the DBs have. Now, my question to you here, Sarah, and I want your evaluation on this. While we see the dual threat nature with the run game and obviously the production there on the ground, can he be relied on more as a passer in the NFL? I mean, going back to 2021, he had 2,800 passing yards at, last season for Liberty. And it's like, that's not ideal. I think if you're in the NFL today, like, you have to pass, I think, in order to be a really good quarterback in the NFL. I feel like you got to be passing around 3,700 to 4,000, 4,200 yards to really be considered of that top 15 range here. Anything less than that, I feel like it's a little bit worrisome.
I think so. It's definitely something to consider. And really, a lot of people have gotten after me on Twitter for making these comparisons, which they get after you on Twitter for just about everything. I could say I'm wearing a green hat and somebody would argue and say, no, it's green and orange with a cream letter on it. So, I mean, they'll argue with you about anything. But these conversations really remind me of what we talked about last year with Trey Lance. Remember, I
Yeah.
think that a big hang up for me was the fact that at North Dakota State, he was really only the primary starter for 1 year. And in that 1 year, he didn't throw as many passes as you would see guys in regular college football throw. Like, Mac Jones, for example, at Alabama only had 1 full year as the starting quarterback, but he still put a lot more as a passer on tape than we saw from Trey Lance. But Trey Lance goes number 3 overall. Mac Jones goes number 15. These conversations with Malik Willis, obviously we have multiple years to look at of film from him. But at the same time, like you're saying, can you be a more full-time passer in the NFL? Because you can't be going out there and getting yourself hurt. I think, and no pun intended, I feel like one of the better comparisons for what we might be looking at for him early on in the NFL is Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles, being able to utilize both sides of that coin. So, and I know we'll talk about that even more too, but I just feel like that's one of those areas. Like Jalen Hurts went to Oklahoma to throw the ball a ton, and he wanted to put that on tape for NFL scouts. And it's not like Malik Willis hasn't thrown the ball enough for us to be able to tell, oh yeah, he's this as a passer, or he's got this trait of this quality or this tendency. But at the same time, like you said, you want to be up at least above the 3,000 yard range, especially in a 17-game NFL. So can you do that going forward? Can you be that kind of guy that we can rely on you? If we need you to throw 45, 50 times in a game, you can win games for us in that way. That's the type of quarterback that you need to have in today's NFL. We see it every single year in the playoffs. Look at that Bills and Chiefs game, right? I mean, that's the kind of shootout that you need to be ready to win in the game today.
Will Malik Willis be a fit for the Denver Broncos? That's a subject that we're going to get into coming up here in just a moment. But real quick, if you're a Colorado sports fan, we have a Locked On podcast for you outside of Locked On Broncos. If you're a Nuggets fan, we have the Locked On Nuggets podcast. If you're an Avalanche fan, we have a Locked On Avalanche podcast hosted by Chris Maselli. And even for the Rockies right now, we know baseball's been put on hold, but we have a Locked On Rockies podcast for you that keeps you up to date as to what's going on with the Colorado Rockies, even though that there's a lockout ongoing right now. Colorado sports fans, this is the place to be here. The Locked On Podcast Network. All right, sir, as we jump on the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, the question remains here. Would Malik Willis be a good fit here for this Denver Broncos football team in 2022 and beyond? I think there's some appealing traits to him that obviously will have to be taken into consideration. For him, he's a 6'1" athletic quarterback, Sarah, and he can be a great fit and blend for Nathaniel Hackett's offense if, in fact, he can do exactly what you said. Can he stay within structure of the offensive scheme and the offensive play style that Nathaniel Hackett will ask of him? I think that's going to be the most important element that we look at here, because at Liberty, at the college level, you can get away with running around when pressure is coming around you. Or, like I said, I think he created a lot of his pressure scenarios himself by holding onto the ball too long. Can he get the ball out of his hands? Can he stay within structure? I think that's going to be an important key for him there, but also adding an element to the Broncos offense that they certainly haven't had before, the RPO aspect. I think he could do really well with that. But Sarah, I think it really boils down right here. The biggest question that we have when it comes to Malik Willis, can in fact, and will Broncos country be willing to allow him to develop? Because look, I'm going to be honest here, just from my standpoint, okay, I think that there's going to be a lot more development that he needs to be super successful at the NFL level. And will Broncos fans be willing to take on the task of being patient with a developing prospect here once again?
That's the big question, isn't it? It just feels like that's not going to be the case. But, I mean, who knows? I guess if Broncos country could really get on board with one guy like Malik Willis and just say, hey, we're just going to rally around this guy instead of poke holes in every single throw that he makes. And I don't know that that's a really realistic expectation. So it's not really up to the fans whether or not the team decides to try to develop a quarterback. But at the same time, that noise is just going to always be there. So is Broncos country willing to be patient? I mean, George Paton, this is his second year as a general manager. I keep reading things on Twitter, especially after a take that I threw out there, which I will not name it on this show because I'm sure we'll talk about it in a future show. But you can go on my Twitter and you can find over 75 responses to a quarterback take that I put out there with people talking about this, that, and the other, just about their willingness to do X, Y, or Z with the quarterback position in Denver. And you have to remember this particular thing about where the Broncos are at right now. The context for Broncos country is way different than it is for George Paton. This is George Paton's second year as a general manager in the NFL. He's never been a general manager before. He hasn't, as far as I'm concerned, Cody, he hasn't made an acquisition at the quarterback position that was really his choice. That's really something that hey, I'm going to stake my name to this acquisition at quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater, we know, was brought in for the coaching staff, and George Paton just happened to have familiarity with him from their time in Minneapolis. And I think that going forward, we want to see George Paton take that big swing at the quarterback position. And I don't know that there's a bigger swing in this draft than Malik Willis. The physical traits, they're all there. The athletic traits, they're all there. The arm talent, I mean, it's big time. And the potential may be higher than any quarterback in this class. But are you willing to live with a lower floor for the higher ceiling? And is that really what Broncos fans want right now? I don't think it necessarily matters. I mean, I think you have to evaluate Malik Willis by those traits that we previously mentioned. Is he tough? Is he intelligent? Does he possess what you want as a leader? Those are the things that George Paton has to prioritize. And if they decide that Malik Willis is the guy, I think they just have to kind of scrap whatever the fans think or want to think or will say about it and go for it.
Well, and I think there's an interesting note too. There's been some rumblings. Look, even if the Broncos, if they have pick number 9 still there, depending on what they decide to do in free agency, if they have pick number 9, they may not even go quarterback at that point. But they also could be looking to get back into the end of round 1. That's been something that's been floated around. So, we talk about it here on Lockdown Broncos, Broncos country. Be aware of it. Even if Denver doesn't go quarterback at 9 in this year's NFL draft, they will more than likely be looking to get in on the back end of round 1 because they've tried that the last several years. Obviously with John Elway for Patrick Queen, they were hoping to get him at linebacker 1 year, but outside of that, it's different here with George Paton. There wasn't a guy that they necessarily wanted to move back up, so they wanted to have the ammunition to move up in round 2 to get Javonte Williams by a couple of picks, and bam, that worked out really well. So you know what I'm going to do, Sarah? I'm going to trust George Paton. He's given me no reason to not have any trust in what he has planned, and I'm excited to see how things go. In Broncos country, would Malik Willis be a great fit, in your opinion, for the Denver Broncos? Would you be patient enough to let him develop? Because, as Sarah mentioned, low floor to high ceiling, the potential is there. Can he get there? That'll be a task here for this coaching staff, if in fact he is one of the Denver Broncos choices. But thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, here on the Lockdown Podcast Network. We appreciate you tuning in every single day for all Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage that you need. You can listen to this in audio podcast format, wherever you get your podcast, or you can keep watching us here on YouTube. We appreciate all the love, all the support. Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button here on the YouTube channel. Comment for the algorithm to help push us out to more members in Broncos country. We appreciate you for all your support and all the love that you send us here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast. But with that said, Broncos country, we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.